Welcome to another episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Player Ranks. In this series, we rank various Yu-Gi-Oh! Themes based on your comments and suggestions. Come back every tier list Tuesday to see an all-new installment of this series. Alright guys, we are back with another tier list. Remember, there is now a playlist for the tier list that you can go watch a million of these if you really wanted to. All of the tier lists that I have. And also, would you like it to make your Master Duel experience a whole lot better?
Are you ready to take your Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel Play experience to a new level? The Untapped GG Companion is here for you. Use the deck tracker to know exactly what cards you have in your deck, and to go over any cards you aren't familiar with yet by hovering over them. It instantly updates when you draw a card, and automatically hides if you check your extra deck or graveyard. This is the perfect tool to help you master a new deck. The Untapped GG Companion also lets you import decks directly into the game in seconds. Copy any YDK or YDKE deck string, create a new deck in game, click the Start Auto Import button, and let us take the wheel. Once the duel is over, check your win rate on your personal stats page. Brag among your friends and share your decks so they can import them into the game too. Start your path to master today by downloading the Untapped GG Companion at ygom.untapped.gg.
Alright, so we're back. Today we are doing all of the solo mode decks again. This is one that's been very highly requested because I did this tier list a while ago. And now a lot of people are like, yo, do it again. There's been so many solo decks that have come out. Could you please, give us a new one? Sure, I will do a new one. But before that, let's see the ranking system here. So S tier is you can get to master rank fairly easily. A for is you have to put a little bit of effort to get into master rank, but you definitely can still do it. B is for niche applications. So there are certain decks that I didn't have this category last time. Certain decks have niche applications where they're very good in certain festivals. Like it'll be like NR festival. A deck will be very good, but it's just on the regular ranked ladder, it's not very good. But in this particular thing, it's quite good. And then you've got Savior Gems, which is, don't buy it. And then F is absolutely not. Just do not under any circumstances make this deck. And these are, of course, ranked based on how well they would do in ranked mode, ranked mode, basically how well they do in ranked mode, not how fun the story is in the solo mode. Obviously they all are somewhat fun in the solo mode because the decks are low power, they're giving you a low powered one, but yeah, let's start ranking them. So first things first is elementsabers, one of the worst archetypes ever made by Konami. This deck is incredibly power crept. It was released in 2017, and it's written as a deck that was released in like 2006. It is very, very, very slow. The deck doesn't have, outside of the field spell, the deck doesn't have a lot of ways to actually put cards into the graveyard. You have the main monster, which is this light guy right here. He discards cards from your hand, and then based on what you discard, you can essentially get certain protections. And then you have the field spell. And then you have the elemental lords that require 5 of a certain attribute. So essentially it requires so much setup to play, but the only like half decent cards are this guy right here, which has a discard cost, so he completely drains resources. Then you have the field spell, which is actually like a legitimately half decent card. It would be good in other archetypes, but unfortunately stuck in this archetype, it's just as bad as all the other cards. So unfortunately the deck has no payoff. It's also very slow. It takes a while to set up, and on top of that, there are effects that, like your elemental lords, like leave the field, you lose a battle phase, and you really can't afford to be losing battle phases when your deck is already as slow as it is. Like the second you put these monsters on board, you got to go ahead and attack. Like I said, the only like decent card is maybe this guy in the field spell, and this guy right here is, like I said, he requires multiple resources to even be playable in the first place. So the deck is very lackluster, one of the worst archetypes probably ever made. Next is Dinomist. I can't put it in Savior Gems because it's a fairly cheap deck actually, so I would say probably it's either a niche deck or maybe like an effort master rank. I'm gonna put it in niche. Basically, this deck is okay. It's a pendulum deck. It's one of the better non-pendulum magician pendulum decks that are out there. There's a card called Dinomist Howling in the archetype that is very good. It essentially like resets the scales for you. Really, really good. The deck is also machines, so it has cool. It has the ability to go into things like, it has level 5 machines, so it has the ability to go into things like Cyber Dragon Infinity, for example. It also has the ability to play Electromite, because that is legal in Master Duel, obviously, and then gets to use all of the pendulum support and all of the machine support that's available out there. So it kind of blends two cool typings in the game, which is quite nice. You can also use Clockwork Knight, for example, turn everything into machines. So for that reason, I think it is kind of niche. I don't think it's going to be. I might even put it into a effort master rank for now, but I might move it around as we kind of think about it. Next is qliphort. I say this is definitely a niche festival applications. This is like a tribute deck, but it's also like a pendulum deck, so it's kind of a fusion of two different decks. It benefits greatly off of skill drain. So when the game first came out, this deck plus skill drain was actually quite nice, and you would see it sometimes on the ladder, but it's definitely kind of fallen off. Skill drain is like a huge part of this deck. Skill drain, rivalry, because they're all machines, like those things are a huge part of the deck. Like I said, this is a tribute deck, so in things like a tribute festival, for example, this deck can be quite good because it doesn't really use the extra deck, so it can be good in those applications. But outside of like really niche applications, this deck you do not see play. Next is World Chalice. World Chalice is a bit of a complicated one, honestly. It's a combo deck that is definitely power crept at this point. It came out like this was literally the first deck. This is one of the first Link decks to ever come out. It was in the very first pack when Links came out, and it shows to a certain degree. World Challenge Justicar is banned, and it's one of the best cards in the entire like archetype, and it's banned. Obviously, it just got unbanned in the TCG, but it's still banned in Master Duel, and you definitely need that card to play this deck. Otherwise, without it, it's just very kind of rough to play the deck, if we're going to be completely honest. And the deck has, like I said, it's just been very, very heavily power creeped over the years. I put in niche festival, but in reality, I can't even think of a festival where this deck would be like really, really good. You can make the argument it'd be good in like maybe a Link festival, but it's definitely a deck you never, ever see on the ladder. Like you never see anybody play this deck. I would say you could put a significant amount of effort in, probably get to master rank, because it does have very, very high combo potential. And it's a very fun deck to play, if we're going to be honest. But generally, I'd say niche festival is probably the place to put it. Next this is an effort master rank. This is Mekk Knights. Mekk Knights is basically a going second deck that plays using the columns that are on the field, and depending on how many cards are in each column. So typically when there are 2 cards in a column or 3 cards in a column, you can special summon a Mekk Knight. Typically it's 2 cards in a column, and basically the whole point is you go second, your opponent sets up their board, they don't know that you're playing Mekk Knights. Master Duel is a best of 1 format, meaning there's only one game. You don't side deck. Your opponent can't make you go first. Your opponent doesn't know to play around the Mekk Knight columns, because obviously why would they know? This deck isn't like super prevalent in the meta, and that has advantages in this game. Now the disadvantages of going second when the deck that has to special summon 5 times is Max C is running around out there, and if you get Max C'd and you're already going second, you're already having to break an opponent's board that is established. That can be really tough sometimes. So there are advantages and disadvantages to playing this deck, but generally I'd say this is an effort master rank. You have to like, to get the master rank, you have to put some serious effort into it. It's not going to be an easy journey whatsoever. Next is Runic. Runic I would typically put in Savior Gems. This is a going second ritual deck that essentially has 2 different cards. The queens basically can attack twice, which is quite cool, and based on which queen you're using, you can attack twice and inflict damage and stuff like that. And then the kings are going to pay life points and then destroy cards on the field. You have the old king that just destroys all other cards on the field, not once per turn. Then you have the new king that destroys all the other cards, but it's a hard once per turn. But basically, yeah, the kings destroy things and the queens attack twice. Overall, I think it's a really cool archetype. It's almost like playing chess in a certain way. Really cool archetype, but I would say going second with a ritual deck, limited resources, playing through interruptions is generally not going to be very easy. We recently had a ritual festival, and I swear to you, the entire time that I played the ritual festival, I never ran into this deck once, and that would have been the time for this deck to shine, of all times for it to shine. But this deck is just generally a little bit difficult to play, and it does have some URs, so the gems, they can be, anytime you have to invest URs in a deck, it can be a little bit expensive. On top of that, you need to play URs that are like just the ritual engine URs, which a lot of them are kind of expensive, kind of like the The Herald of the Diviner, for example, you have to play that. That's a UR, and then you have to play a bunch of SRs. So it can be kind of gem costly, unfortunately. So this one is probably either C, save your gems, or probably B, niche application. We're talking Ritual Festival, but it would be somewhere between those two. Next is Megalith. Megalith is like at the very, very top of niche ritual. Like niche, it's at the very top of niche decks. It is like one of the best niche decks because this deck is outrageously cheap, and it's basically a ritual deck that it's a rock ritual deck. Megalith is that is actually quite good. It puts a decent amount of interruptions on the board, but it definitely has a lot of trouble playing against like the regular meta. It is not that good against just. It's not going to do well against Kashtira. It's not going to do well against Pearly. It's not going to do well against the best decks in the game. But it's funny because this deck, every time there's kind of a festival, this deck kind of like sprouts up and it becomes fairly good. We had the Ritual Festival. This deck was absolutely dominant. We had the NR Festival, which is the the common rare festival. This deck was absolutely dominant. It's probably the best deck by far in the entire like event. In that, it puts up interruptions very easily for a very low cost. It's probably one like the king of niche festival decks. Could you possibly, with some effort, get to master rank with this deck? I would say so. Yeah, you could probably do that if you max out the deck, Diviner of the Heralds, all that stuff. You could probably get into master rank, but it's definitely like this is a festival warrior right here if we ever seen one. Next is this is the Gem Knights. Gem Knights is. Sometimes people play it as an FTK, sometimes people play it as an OTK strategy, meaning you just kind of, not really like go second, but it's kind of like you just play with the Mekk Knights, and not with the Mekk Knights, with the Gem Knights. The deck, I'm not going to lie, is a little bit underwhelming, and even with the new support, I don't want to put it next to Demise, because it's definitely better than Demise. I'd say it's probably in the niche festival, although no one really ever plays this deck. You very, very, very rarely ever see this deck played in any capacity whatsoever on any ladder anywhere. Like, you never see this deck played. It's extremely rare that you ever see it. Like I said, the FTK is very much hindered in Master Duel because a lot of the cards that you would need to do it are hit. So, and on top of that, hand traps are quite prevalent, especially in the ranked ladder. So I would say probably niche application for this deck. This is Gladiator Beasts. Gladiator Beasts are an interesting one. Gladiator Beasts are not played the way that you remember Gladiator Beasts being played. You don't wait until the end of the battle phase. You don't switch out into other monsters. That playstyle is completely dead for Gladiator Beasts. They completely pivoted in terms of how they designed this deck. This deck is now more of a going first, set up a board, summon an Appaloosa. There's the new the Tamer, the new Gladiator Beast Tamer, the one that lets you cheat one out of the extra deck. There's another one that now negates. Like, the deck is just as much a going first deck as all of the other decks have ever been. It is no longer like a going second deck where you switch out monsters, and it just, the old playstyle is like completely gone. It is a bit of an expensive deck, and it is better than a lot of the decks that I put here, but it is a very expensive deck. There are actually quite a bit of URs that you need, and even SRs that you need. In even the main deck, like, it's kind of crazy. It's kind of an expensive deck. I would say it's probably, with some effort, you could probably get to master rank, but I'd say it's a significant amount of effort. You can mix it with tri-brigades too. I'd say it's probably like a niche festival deck for the most part, but even then it's kind of expensive. Next is Karakuri. This is a synchro deck that I would say is probably like somewhere in B niche application, not something that's super good. It is an okay deck. It's basically it's all of the monsters have to attack, and then when they change battle position, you get some additional effects sometimes. So the deck overall is generally kind of like a cool, interesting deck, but as far as the synchro deck goes, there are definitely much better synchro decks out there. I'd say it's probably in niche festival, somewhere around there. Next is Shiranui. Shiranui, this is one of the decks you actually get a free structure deck if you just complete the solo mode, which is kind of crazy. You get a nice fine start. Now, you can't play pure Shiranui and get to master rank. I don't think I've ever seen anyone successfully do that, because the pure Shiranui deck requires a lot of setup, and unfortunately the deck isn't actually very good at setting it up. But once you do get set up, the deck is very strong, because now you have all the monsters in the graveyard that keep banishing themselves. Then the deck is very good, but until you have that degree of setup, the deck can be really, really weak. Last time I think I put it in easy master rank. If you mix it with zombie world, it's an easy master rank. I don't quite agree with myself now because obviously the meta's changed. Back then, it would have been easy master rank if you mixed it with Eldritch. If you mixed it with zombie world, it would be quite easy. I'd say this is probably an effort master rank now, just because the meta has shifted so much. It's still like quite a good deck. Again, you could Grassix Greener back then was at 3. You had all of the zombie stuff, all of the stuff like that. It was all available. Eldritch was at full power and nothing was hit. Like back then, everything was very different. Now, this definitely takes a lot more effort. I would say effort master rank. You just have to mix it with Grassix Screener, triple tactics, thrust to search the Grassix Screener, the zombie world package, and you can definitely get it into master rank, but it's going to take some time. Next is the Geargia deck. This deck, although fun, I don't think is actually all that good. It's definitely like a niche, maybe like, not even with Xseed Festival. I think it's a very, at best, this deck is kind of an Xseed engine, if I'm going to be honest with you. It can go into things like Zeus and just basically anything an Xseed deck can do well. It can essentially do, but it's just less good than all of the other Xseed decks. Like Zodiacs, for example, just is completely a better Xseed engine than this deck could possibly be. As far as the machine aspect of the deck, it's very lackluster, and there are just much better machine decks out there. Even Dinomist, I would argue, is just a better machine deck and a better machine engine than the Geargia deck. And in general, it's just Earth machines in general are just better played on their own. Also, this deck is actually kind of expensive. I would even maybe put in Savior Gems. The extra deck actually has a decent amount of URs, which is like kind of shocking considering the fact that the deck is so underwhelming, if we're going to be quite honest. So I'd say it's probably in Savior Gems. Digital Bugs is a very lackluster archetype. I think it's a stop before it's too late. It is power crept by crawlers, and then power crept again by other bug archetypes. Like they're actually on this list, funny enough. Other bug archetypes, it's power crept by like beat troopers. So I mean, it's literally power crept twice. But as far as what the deck does, it basically all of the digital bugs have effects when their battle phase, when their battle positions change. They get an effect. There's a newer card, the newest card of all of them that came out. You can actually prompt that to happen, so you don't have to just literally survive and hope to flip your battle position. But this deck is incredibly slow. It's one of those decks, just like Elementsabers, where this deck came out. You would think like you would read this deck and think, wow, this is like kind of like a maybe this is like a Zexal archetype that failed or something. Like that's how old you would think the deck is. But no, this deck came out in 2017. That wasn't that long ago. This deck came out after Zodiacs. This deck came out after Zodiacs. This deck came out after Elemental Dragons. This deck came out after Burning Abyss. Like this deck came out after a lot of decks that were really good and are still good to this day. And it's just incredibly lackluster. It came out, I think, in the same year as Elementsabers, and they're both just very lackluster decks. And its newest support card came out, I would say, like 2 years ago. So Konami released a wave of support for digital bugs, and they released one more card, and they never supported the deck again. So it's really lacking support. I wouldn't recommend building it. Also, it has a decent amount of in-archetype URs for a deck that really isn't going to win you much. Next is Monarchs. Monarchs is another one that's kind of complicated. I think it's a niche. You can play it in like when they had the no extra deck festival. You could play this deck and it could probably, get you some wins. But if we're going to be totally honest with you, if we're going to be honest here, you have Fluunderies, which have power crept every single tribute deck that has ever been released. So True Dracos are power crept True Dracos are power crept. The qliphorts are power crept, and Monarchs are power crept. They're all power crept because straight up, Fluunderies does it better than all of the other tribute decks, despite the fact that it's been hit on the ban list to the degree that it has. It's still just better. Next is Alley of Justice. I think this is an F. Stop before it's too late. They dropped this into the solo mode, and I don't even know why they dropped this into. I mean, I guess it has kind of a cool story. It's a part of the Hidden Arsenal lore, but I think it's more of a lore deck than anything else at this point. Hidden Arsenal decks are hidden arsenal archetypes in general are famous for having main deck monsters that are complete garbage and extra deck monsters that were good. And now those extra deck monsters have also been power crept. So now you're at a situation where the main deck monsters were always bad and the extra deck monsters are now power crept completely. So the only cards that ever really saw play in the Alley of Justice archetype were Alley of Justice Catastor, which is the monster right here, which essentially when it battles, I believe it's a non-dark monster, destroys it automatically. And then there's an Alley of Justice Cycle Reader, which is a hand trap. You discard it and you can banish 2 light monsters from your opponent's graveyard. That saw play in like Blue Eyes format, it saw play in Drytron format, it saw play in very, very niche formats. But outside of those 2 cards, the entire archetype has pretty much been unusable forever. I think it might even be worse than elementsabers. It would be interesting to see a matchup between these 3. It would 100% be very interesting. But I would say it's probably in stop before it's too late. It's just a deck you don't want to make. And it definitely has URs just like a lot of the other decks. Next is Beat Troopers. Beat Troopers is actually quite a good deck. I always call this Beat Troopers is the Dragon Link of insects. Basically, you're not playing just Beat Troopers, you're playing Beat Troopers plus like a mix of other archetypes. I'd say if you were going to rank this in the overall, like an overall, I would say this is probably like a tier 3 archetype, but tier 3 out of the solo mode is actually quite good because a lot of the solo mode decks are kind of like Konami's B tier. It's kind of like the decks that they forgot about, so like, oh, let's just put in solo mode. So this deck is actually, like I said, it's like the Dragon Link of bugs, for example. And it's actually overall quite good. It can set up with like a 2-card combo, it can set up a decent board of negates, and it uses, like I said, it uses all of the insect support. It can be a little expensive, but it uses all of the insect support. So it uses Bee Troopers, it uses Battle Wasps, it uses generic insect support printed over the years. It uses even crawlers, for example. If you wanted to, you could probably tech in some digital bugs. I don't think you should, but you can tech in digital bugs. But it basically uses all of the insect support that has ever been released to make an overall kind of like a pile insect deck. And the end board can be quite good. You have Cicada King options. You have Stingalanus, which is like it banishes out of your opponent's graveyard. You have in archetype ways to negate monster effects, negate spawn trap cards. So overall, it's actually quite good and can set up a decent amount of interruptions. And then you've got the fusions, and you've got the giant ballpark package available to you if you wanted to go second, for example. You have the new giant ballpark stuff that's come out. So overall, I think this is probably like a master rank. You put the effort in, you're getting into master rank. I would say not even, I wouldn't say like a lot of effort. Like these take a lot more effort, but this would, like, if you're a good player and you play Battle Wasps slash Beat Troopers, you could definitely get into master rank with it. Next is Plunder Patrol. Plunder Patrol is one of the best archetypes here. Yeah, Plunder Patrol is definitely like I would say, again, I wouldn't say it's like, none of the decks here are like easy mastering, because obviously none of these are like top tier decks. Top tier would be like Pearly and stuff. I would say this is probably like Pearly, Despia, like stuff like that is probably like easy master rank. But if you put like a little bit of effort in and learn this deck, you could definitely get to master rank. This is another deck that uses all of the different extra deck summoning mechanics, which is actually quite cool. It's all based on pirates. It's got a lot of the pirate names like Blackbeard and stuff like that, Whitebeard, and it uses all of the different summoning mechanics. And then when you summon those monsters, you can equip them to your monsters and they gain additional effects. Overall, I'd say the deck is one of the decks that you don't really see that often on the ladder, but it's a deck that definitely wins a lot, and you have to know how to play against it, otherwise you're getting absolutely destroyed. Next is Bujin. This is a Save Your Gems deck. This is another kind of like rank 4 engine deck, similar to like Teller Knights and stuff like that, and it's from that era, so it would be totally understandable why they are. Like I said, it's a Beast Warrior for the most part archetype. They're based actually on GX characters, funny enough. So if you look at them closely, all of them are based on GX characters like Jaden and Alexis and Bastion and Chaz, for example. Overall, kind of a decent and interesting design choice. I'd say the archetype, like I said, is in Save Your Gems. It's got some really expensive cards, and as far as XC decks, it's definitely not as good as a lot of the other ones, so I'd say Save Your Gems. Dangers are a weird one because Dangers not a deck. Dangers has always been an engine, so I don't even know where I would even put this. And if I'm going to be honest with you, it just depends on where you are. If you're mixing it with Dark World, Danger Dark World, I'd say it's probably like an effort master rank. just because Dark World has to contend with things like Max C. When you play Dark World and you play against Max C, you have to make them deck out, and if you can't make them deck out, you basically lose because they're going to draw 55 cards. And then the other issue is that Dark World is actually still waiting on multiple support cards to even be fully playable. It's still waiting for their search card that isn't in Master Duel, but it's been in the TCG and the OCG for like a year, if not more at this point. And then it's also waiting on the new fusion monster that they announced, and we have no idea when it's getting here. But obviously this is about Dangers. Dangers is about, basically they're like a bunch of cards that you reveal, and then you discard a random card from your hand. If the card that you reveal is not discarded, you special summon that monster, the danger monster, and you draw a card. A cool archetype overall. I would say the big issue with it, again, is just in Master Duel it can be a little tough to play when there are just so many weird floodgates everywhere. Max C, like things like that make this deck really difficult to play. And again, it's more of an engine, so it's tough to really grade. Like this deck it's good in like, for example, 8-axis. You can play it in that deck. It's a going second rank 8 deck. You can play Danger Bigfoot, Danger Nessie to search them, and then Danger Thunderbird, for example. It's a rank 8 engine. You can play it in Dark World. You can go second. You can go first. It just depends on what deck you're playing, but this has never really been played pure the way that Konami perhaps intended it to be played. Next is Herald. Herald is interesting. I'd say this is Herald. Drytron is probably somewhere up here. I'd say it's master rank, not easy. Again, this is like, none of these decks are easy, so I'm going to change this to like master rank, not easy master rank, because none of these are really going to be easy. But you can get to master rank without putting in too much effort. Again, Drytron Herald, still a very strong deck. They've quietly been unhitting things on Master Duel's ban list that kept this deck at bay for a long time. So once in a while you'll see this on the ladder, and if your opponent doesn't have a DD Crow, it's pretty much over, because you're going to be able to cycle out the Drytron monsters and build a fairly strong board. So I'd say it's definitely somewhere in master rank. Next is Tenyi. This is another one that's kind of like, it's similar to Dangers, where this deck on its own is kind of like, I'd say, an effort deck, maybe even a niche application deck, but mixed with Sword Soul, it's easily probably the best deck that I've shown here thus far, because this mixed with Sword Soul, this mixed with Sword Soul is up here, because this is the deck that has had the most competitive success in Master Duel out of all of these decks that are here, and it's about 50% of the Sword Soul deck, because you have to play it, and it's very important. You have the Shathana to summon a monster from the deck. You have another Shathana. You have the Ashina to summon a monster from the deck. You have the one to recycle it from the banish pile. You have the Vishuddha to bounce a card. Like, all of those cards are very important in the Sword Soul would not be anywhere without Tenyis. But at the same time, Tenyis would be nowhere without Sword Soul. They're kind of like an archetype that are held together. I would say this is probably like a master rank deck. Again, it's not easy master rank, because nothing is really easy master rank out of all of the solo decks. But I'd say this, and you mix in the Sword Soul cards, is probably like a master rank deck. I've stayed fairly consistent. Again, if I'm saying Dangers are with Dark Worlds, then I'm going to say that this is with Sword Soul, this is with Zombie World. Obviously, mixing the decks with other archetypes is okay. This is a whole entire mixed archetype. So this is mixed too with Drytrons, for example. So as far as this goes, this mixed with Sword Soul, I'd say is probably one of the higher tier decks here. Next is Dream Mirror. This deck is a really sad one for me. It's definitely an F stop before it's too late, and it's a combination of Savior Gems and F stop before it's too late. This is an archetype. This is Dream Mirrors. One of the nicest artworks in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh, but it is so lackluster and so difficult to set up. It's not even that it's difficult to play. It's difficult to set up. You have to keep field spells on your field and in your opponent's field. If you have the wrong monster and the wrong field spell, they just do nothing. So if you have the light field spell and a dark monster, you can't even activate them. They switch at the end phase. It's optional if you want to, but overall the deck is just very, very slow. The boss monsters are fusion monsters. They're just kind of okay. They're not really that broken, considering like how many resources you have to sink into actually summoning these monsters. They're just kind of okay. And then on top of that, they really only have one card that's good, and it's locked in the solo mode. I forget what it is, but I believe it's the level 4 monster. It's one of the only like good cards in the entire archetype. Everything else is very, very lackluster. Overall, the deck is just kind of like a mess. It's very difficult to pull off any of this stuff. You can't mix any other engines into the deck because you have to see a lot of field spells. You have to see a lot of the monsters, and it's kind of the problem with the deck. You have to play like 3 field spells, you have to play 3 of each field spell. So you have 6 field spells. And the field spells, to a certain degree, are bricks. And to a certain degree, if you don't draw them, you lose. So if you don't draw them, you lose. If you draw too many, then you just lose anyway. So you have these 6 bricks that you have to play in the deck that rotate out. On top of that, you have monsters that don't do anything unless you have the proper corresponding field spell, even in play to begin with. So the deck can be a very, very bricky mess, and it's fairly expensive. There's a decent amount of URs in the archetype, so it can be a little frustrating. Next is Gen X. Gen X is another F, stop before it's too late. Gen X Alley, the water monster, was like a decently good card for a long time in like Mermills and stuff like that. And then that's about it. Gen X Alley, I forget what it's called, but it's a water monster that sends a monster to the graveyard. That used to be fairly good. Other than that, like, the archetype has almost never seen play. And it's got a new support card that's coming out that I don't think will have like a huge impact on the meta, but it'll definitely fix this deck and it'll make it more playable than it is. I'd say it's definitely an F tier. Don't build that deck. Ghost Drake is another like F tier deck. It is so slow. I don't even know what they were thinking when they really designed this deck. It is kind of like a slow, like, flip your opponent's monsters face down strategy is what Ghost Drakes are. They're just a very, very slow deck that combines a lot of the older archetypal, like the older like forms of Yu-Gi-Oh play. So it's like a lot of like, oh, you can flip this down during the end phase and then flip it back face up, and then like it's a lot of those cards, which have almost entirely been power crept out of the game. You just never see them. That is kind of an issue. On top of that, the only cards that ever see play from this archetype are the big monster, which is the win condition one. That's the only one that sometimes people use it to cheat out like a quick win condition. Somebody was actually running it in Pearly, for example. But like other than that one card that saw archetypal play, like this deck almost never sees any play whatsoever. Sometimes people will run things like Alucard because you can attack directly, and then you can go into a Zeus with a rank 1 monster. Like, literally, other than a few of the X seeds, none of this deck has ever seen play. All of the monsters are extremely underwhelming, so I would say definitely it's stop before it's too late. Next is, I believe this is Mermills with Atlanteans. I would say this is like an effort master rank. This deck is a water combo deck. Water in general is probably the most undersupported type right now. They've come out with so much good fire stuff that it's actually half decent. So the water stuff is now really like under supported. This kind of plays with all of the other generic water stuff that exists in Master Duel. Now the problem is the best water monster probably of all time, the Michael Jordan of water monsters, is totally awesome and the card's banned. And this deck actually used to play totally awesome. On top of that, it uses the frogs. Again, gone are the frog. The swap frog, I believe, is at 1. Totally awesome is at 0. So that was like one of their main forms of playing around things like Nibiru and just playing around hand traps in general, is to make it totally awesome as fast as possible. Bahamut Shark is available, but what are you going to Bahamut Shark into? There's no totally awesome. So that kind of sucks. This deck used to be able to hand loop, and it still can hand loop, but again, you want to set up some negates so that your opponent can't interrupt your hand loop. So you want to set up, totally awesome, for example, but you can't. So the deck is a little bit, number one, it's a little bit power crept, and then number two, a lot of its best weapons are just not available because they're hit on the ban list because of, sprites and other peripheral stuff, unfortunately. So I'd say it's probably somewhere in a effort master rank. You definitely have to put significant effort into it, so probably up here. Next is Mutants. I'd say this is another effort master rank up here. This is a reptile based deck, all based on essentially like mutants and in a certain sense aliens. It uses some of the generic reptile support, some of it, not all of it. But overall, I think the deck is definitely like an A effort rank. It's a cool deck because it can make its monsters like unaffected by stuff and can equip the monsters. overall, I'd say it's a cool archetype, and it's got one of the coolest dual fields in the game. But I think it's just a little bit underwhelming in terms of the results that it can possibly produce. Next is Lightsworn. This is an interesting one because I would say, as of right now, this is either niche or save your gems. As of right now, it is kind of, I wouldn't say it's even that much of an expensive deck. I'd say it's a niche deck, but it just got support announced that is going to make the deck fairly good. I would probably say the deck could maybe go up here, even up here, once the new support comes out. But as I've said in my last few ban lists, in my last few tier lists, like, the deck is just very underwhelming in terms of its cards, because a lot of the cards are just kind of stuck in 2007, and a lot of the other cards are just straight up bricky. So you have bricky cards, and you have cards that are like stuck in 2007. And the problem with that is, when you have cards that are stuck in 2007, it's very difficult to play the deck, because you have all of these new archetypes. It's been power crept, until it's been power crept from here until the end of time. It's kind of like Gladiator Beast, where the old playstyle is almost entirely gone. You're not waiting until the end phase to mill. That's no one's doing that anymore, because you have to set up a board now. That's how Yu-Gi-Oh's become. It's, you have to set up a board on turn 1. You can't wait. I'm gonna mill 3 cards in my end phase. Oh, look, I milled a wolf. And then I have 2 traps face down, and I'm gonna stop my opponent, and it's gonna go back to my turn. Now I'm gonna synchro someone with the wolf. That's not happening anymore. That playstyle is gone. It's over. There's no wait till the end phase and play over 10 turns. That's over for Lightsworns in that regard. So the new support that's coming out is going to make it just kind of like every other Yu-Gi-Oh deck, where you have to set up a board on turn 1. It is kind of cool that you can now use like the fusion stuff. But again, I'd have to see, once the new support comes out, the deck can be reevaluated. But as of right now, it's probably like a niche deck, maybe even save your gems, because it is somewhat expensive. Next is Rika. Rika is up here. Rika is either better than Tenyi Sword Soul, or like they're very close. These decks are very close. I'd say they're both, and you know what's funny? They're both fairly reasonable in terms of price. Actually, you know what? I think Rika, only because Rika is cheaper. Rika is one of the best decks, like in terms of gem cost to success ratio. Rika is one of the best decks. Because you really don't have to invest a lot, and it actually produces some really good results. So you have Rika, and then you have Rika Sun Avalon. Pure Rika is a deck that essentially tributes your opponent's monsters, and by tributing your opponent's monsters, you get to activate your effect. So it's always awesome to do. It's kind of like Lair of Darkness, if Lair of Darkness was better, and it only was locked into plants. So Lair of Darkness is like dark, tribute your opponent's monsters. This is like plants tributing your opponent's monsters, and it's actually quite cool. You tribute your opponent's monsters, and sometimes you can tribute your opponent's monsters in order to tribute more of your opponent's monsters, tribute your opponent's monsters, steal your opponent's monsters. But overall, it's a very, very consistent and strong strategy. And there's a new card, the Petal Dancer maybe, or something like that. But it's a very good card because you can banish it out of your graveyard in order to negate something. It's one of the coolest interactions you could possibly have on a card. It's actually a really, really strong card. That is very good. And then there's the Rika Sun Avalon deck, which is not, it's not pure Rika. Pure Rika is all about distributing, taking monsters. It's kind of like a control deck. You can run things like Gozen, you can run things like Rivalry, because they're all plants, they're all water, so you can run things like that, and it's a very strong control deck. Then you have Rika Sun Avalon, which is a combo deck. It is a total combo deck. You mix it with Sun Avalon and basically all of the other plant support that's available to you. The Sun Avalon support, the Sylvan support, you have the Aromage support, you have the Rika support, and your entire goal is to put up as many negates as possible with those monsters. Then you have the Therion support, so it's kind of like a plant pile deck, and that deck is probably better than all of these decks that I'm showing you here today. And that's how Yu-Gi-Oh's kind of shifted in this direction, where you no longer really, like, it's funny because Yu-Gi-Oh started, we didn't really have archetypes, then they gave us archetypes, and then archetypes kind of overtook all of the decks that weren't archetypes, and now we're getting back to a part of Yu-Gi-Oh where now pile decks are even better than the archetypal decks. So we had non-archetype, archetype, and now we have pile, and that's essentially been kind of like the evolution of Yu-Gi-Oh. And the pile deck is actually, as you can see up here, a lot of these are pile decks. You've got this is Rika's. It's going to be a plant pile. This is going to be like a Tenyi. It's going to be like a worm pile. It's going to use a lot of different worm support, because essentially with piles, what you can do is you can use a bunch of different effects that are hard once per turns. But since there's 30 different effects, they can all resolve, even if they are hard once per turns, because you're going to go through 30 different cards that are hard once per turn, so it doesn't matter that they're hard once per turns. There's another one, Bee Troopers is a pile insect deck, so some of the best decks in the game have become zombie pile. The Shiranui is a zombie pile deck. You've got like Earth Machines is another pile deck, Dragon Link. Some of those decks have really become some of the best decks in the game because you just, like I said, you just use a bunch of different cards that are once per turn, and it doesn't matter that they're all once per turn because you don't use them all in one turn anyway. So yeah, definitely Rika Sun Avalon, definitely up here in S tier. This deck is actually quite interesting. I'd say this is a kind of a slow deck. This is Nephthys, and this is a deck that's a little bit weird because in my entire life, I always saw Nephthys as a card that inspired the Fire King archetype. And then one day they just kind of released Nephthys its own archetype, which I always thought was weird. I really did. I always thought that was weird. Like, I thought, you know, when you think about it, this card is essentially like a Fire King card. It is like almost entirely exactly the same as every other Fire King card. And then one day they just wake up and they're like, you know what, we're giving that its own archetype. And it was extremely weird. And it's a ritual archetype that is built around this. And why they made it rituals, I will never understand too, because it was kind of like out of nowhere. I'd say it's probably like a Savior Gems, maybe niche application. I would have put it in Savior Gems, but a couple of days ago, I played against somebody who made like at least a 6-7 interruption board with this deck, and it was definitely better than every other deck that we have that I graded here. They mixed it with, I believe they mixed it with sprites, and they use sprite. They use the sprite that special summons a level 2 monster from the graveyard. I forget its name. I'm sorry. But basically, it's they use that Sprite Elf. They use Sprite Elf in order to kind of like turbo out the level 2 monsters in this deck. And then this deck, on top of that, it does have some really good cards. Like, it has a pretty broken ritual monster, the one that lets you special summon from the deck, ignoring summoning conditions. That thing's pretty broken. It's extra. Its level link 3 is pretty good because if you use 3 rituals, it becomes like 4,800 attack, can't be destroyed by card effects, can't be destroyed by battle. Things like crazy. And then of course Nephthys, which I don't even know if they really even run Nephthys in this deck, which is kind of unfortunate because the entire archetype is built around Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys, and I'm pretty sure that most of them have actually cut this card entirely. So I'd say it's probably like a niche ritual deck. You probably would use it in like a ritual festival, although you didn't even see this in the ritual festival. You could probably put the effort in, you know, get it into master rank, but you'd have to put a significant amount of effort to do that. Next is S-Force. This deck is another great disaster. I'd say S-Force is, like I said, I'd say it's probably in a Savior Gems situation. I think it's better than all of these decks here, but it's definitely like a Savior Gems. It basically plays around columns, which column play to a large degree is kind of dead. The only deck that can maybe still do it is Mekk Knights, but for the most part, columns and worrying about columns, all of that is completely gone. No one's playing around columns. I'd say more than likely this deck just doesn't have enough support to function properly, and it definitely could really use another wave of support to even be like fully playable. Next is the Six Samurai. I would say is probably an effort master rank. Six Samurai has some real good, some serious access to some really good cards that are just absolutely broken. You've got Shien, which is really good, but then you've got the red and the blue guy that can essentially create infinite loops that will essentially help you accomplish anything you want in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! If there's something that you want to accomplish in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! You could do it with that infinite loop. You want to draw Exodia, you can do it. You want to like speed up the clock and win through final countdown, you can do it. You can do literally almost anything with the red and the blue monster that essentially can infinitely summon themselves to the field. You can do basically anything. You can set up an unbreakable board, but it can be very inconsistent to do so. I would say it's probably like an A master rank, like effort master rank. You almost never see this deck in master rank or even anywhere close to it, so I'd say it's probably there. Starry Night is a deck that I'd say it's like a niche festival maybe deck. It plays around a normal level 7 light monster, which is the I forget its name. It's this monster right here, but basically it plays around that monster. It's I'd say it's kind of like a cool archetype. It's like fairies and dragons, and it can be played as kind of like a control archetype, but it's very, very slow to set up, and that's probably the biggest issue with this deck. And then the gem cost is actually quite high. It has a decent amount of URs. Probably has like 9 URs that you have to play in archetype. It can be quite expensive for a deck that can be like kind of like a fun pet deck that isn't going to get you a lot of wins. Next is Subterror. Subterror is probably up here at the top of like Effort Master Rank. This deck is good overall, but the issue is Master Duel has hit a lot of the things that make this deck good in general. So a lot of the floodgates are gone, which this deck heavily relies on floodgates. So goes in Rivalry. Not really Rivalry, but goes in because they're all Earth. And there could only be one, for example, critical to this deck. And they're at 1, so you only have 2 copies total in your deck. On top of that, Dragoon never came out in Master Duel, so that was their boss monster. This deck doesn't have a boss monster. Dragoon is the boss monster. You make a Dragoon and you flip there can only be 1, and then you use Guru to essentially just keep control of the game. And that never happened in Master Duel because Dragoon has never been legal in Master Duel. And even if it was, like I said, this deck is very reliant on playing a lot of floodgates, and a lot of the floodgates have already been severely hit in Master Duel. So I'd say it's probably like a high effort Master Rank deck. It is just better than a lot of the other decks here because Subterror Guru is a crazy card. And so is the field spell. Subterror Guru, the field spell, and Subterror Battle. 3 cards that are just very, very, very strong. And they can essentially help you get over any monster by battle. They can search every single turn. And then the field spell searches too. So overall, like it's kind of like a crazy resource loop. So it's probably somewhere in A. Weather Painters was pretty good when Skill Drain was out. And it's actually gotten new support, which is cool. I'd say this is kind of like in a niche category. Maybe you could put it in like an effort Master Rank, but I'd say this is kind of like a niche festival deck. Overall, I think this is a good deck, not a fantastic deck. It was definitely a lot better when Skill Drain was at 3, because essentially what this deck does is you can use the spell and the trap cards in the back row become the effects of the monsters, so you can essentially cheat around things, and the monsters banish themselves for cost, so they're off the field, and then you can essentially do anything you want. So the deck perfectly plays around Skill Drain while making it very difficult for your opponent to play in Skill Drain. But without Skill Drain, this deck is just very lackluster. So niche festival application. This is FA/UA. These were 2 separate archetypes, and the Konami woke up one day and just like combined them. And that was kind of funny. So one is like a car racing archetype, and the other one is like a sports archetype. You know, they're both sports, so one day Konami was like, they're both sports, let's just put them together. So they became one archetype. I'd say UA is the more dominant archetype of the 2, and it's kind of like a fun lower tier deck to play in like silver or gold, or even maybe in certain festivals it's fun, but overall I don't think it's nearly as competitive as some of the other decks on this tier list. It's got a cool like main deck monsters, but overall I don't think it's that good. Vendread is a super niche deck. I would say maybe play this in a ritual festival or some kind of festival, but I don't think that this deck has a lot of similar issues that Shiranui has. So the problem with Shiranui is that it just has trouble like putting the monsters into the graveyard, and the issue with that is it has trouble like filling the graveyard. So Vendread is similar to Shiranui, where it needs monsters in graveyard in order to operate, but the problem is the deck doesn't give you a lot of great ways to put those monsters into the graveyard. And again, the same can be said about Shiranui, but Shiranui can mix things like Zombie World and that entire engine, the milling the deck, the Zombie World. And the reason that this deck can't do it quite as effectively because it has to play a lot of the ritual stuff, because it is a ritual zombie archetype. So you have to play an entire like ritual engine to facilitate that. So now you have to mix that with Zombie World, and then on top of that, mix that with the milling engine of like maybe some of the Shizu cards. Maybe you want to put Grassix Screener, and it becomes too many things in the deck where you have like dead hands because you mixed in too many different engines. So I'd say it's probably like niche application. It's like a decent deck, nothing too crazy. And then the last one is Crawler. Crawler is definitely better than Digital Bug. It's literally Digital Bug but better. So I'd say it's probably in Savior Gems. It's not really that great of an archetype. I'm putting it in Savior Gems because it's essentially a flip effect deck. It's like if Man-Eater Bug got its own archetype, this would essentially be crawlers. I'd recommend playing the Bug Pile deck, which is the Bee Troopers. It's a much better deck overall than playing crawlers, because crawlers are they're kind of weak and power crept and they're slow, and they have certain effects that are like decent. Like their new crawler is probably their craziest one, the one that special summons. It flips a monster face up and then it special summons itself. Like that one is crazy because it's very good for comboing off, and you can essentially flip anything. You can set an Ash face down and flip it. That card is very, very strong, and you can play it in the Bee Trooper deck, but I would say save your gems for the Bee Trooper deck. You will have to put more gems into it, but overall it's just a stronger archetype than the crawlers are pure. And that's it. That is all of the solo mode decks. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Obviously we're going to add more decks, so if you want me to update you on that, just let me know in the comment section down below. And thank you for watching. La, 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 la.